Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Murkowski, for scheduling this hearing, and it's good to be here to discuss the President's budget proposal for the Department of Interior, and so I welcome all the witnesses here this morning. Certainly welcome to Secretary Jewell, and this will be your final budget presentation before the committee, so thank you for your work on this. Many of the priorities in this budget, such as the full funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the development of funding for the National Park Centennial Initiative, reflect tireless efforts by those in the agency to work on these issues. And one of the signature issues here involves finding new ways to get young people to the outdoors and experience and enjoy our national parks and public lands. This budget includes funding for the Secretary's Every Kid in a Park initiative, which provides free one-year admission pass for every fourth grader in the country to visit our national parks and other public lands. So thank you, Secretary Jewell, for your leadership on that initiative. It's greatly appreciated. So I commend you for that and look forward to discussing many of these proposals. The proposed budget of $13.4 billion for the Department of Interior reflects a very modest increase, totaling half of 1% over current level funding. In my view, this is a very responsible proposal. It balances the funding for the Department of Interior's often conflicting conservation and development mandates. And more importantly, I'm pleased that the budget and the recent secretarial directives are taking a long-term and forward-looking approach to responsible energy development on public lands to address the impacts of climate change into the future. At the budget hearing last year, I expressed my concern that the department's efforts to reform the coal program were not going far enough and fast enough. What a difference a year makes. I want to thank Secretary Jewell for her bold action to modernize the federal coal program. She's been a deliberate and thoughtful person when it comes to this issue, and thank you for the open and honest conversation. What we have now is the Bureau of Land Management is in the proposed rulemaking. And the Bureau of Land Management also has held listening sessions on this throughout last August. So the Secretary order that Secretary Jewell issued this January requires the Bureau of Land Management to undertake a programmatic EIS, or I should say programmatic environmental impact statement, to update the coal leasing program and ensure that taxpayers get a fair return. While the programmatic EIS is being prepared, no new federal coal leasing will be issued, with limited exceptions. This programmatic EIS is long overdue. It has been 37 years since the current EIS was written. So I think 37 years is long enough, so I'm so thankful that this process is underway. This pause on new leasing activities is consistent with the actions of 5 previous administrations, 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat, as well as leasing moratorium approved by the Republican-controlled Senate in the 80s. So we cannot continue with business as usual. The cost to the taxpayers and the public do not match. We cannot continue to lease coal for $1 a ton and collect another dollar in royalties while the cost to society is about $70 per ton. That enormous gap between public revenue and ultimate cost to the public is simply not defensible. So there's much more to do in reforming coal leasing, so I plan to ask you about this, finishing the stream protection rule, fixing reclamation self-bonding requirements, which are hugely important to addressing the legacy and impacts of coal to society. And I want to thank you for taking action on these. The past year has also been a busy one for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and working with Senator Murkowski and other members of this committee, we were able to pass out a bipartisan Land and Water Conservation Fund legislation and make it permanent and dedicated to address the National Park Service maintenance needs. So this legislation, which is still in the energy bill that we are trying to move forward on, I think is a critical agreement, and hopefully we will be able to get this ultimately enacted. The Omnibus Appropriations Bill that was passed last December extended Land and Water Conservation Fund authority for 3 years and increased the funding for almost 50% to $450 million. And while this is certainly a step in the right direction and was hard-fought achievement, I want to make sure that we continue to get permanent reauthorization of LWCF and full dedicated funding. I strongly support the President's budget proposal to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund at its authorized level of $900 million. The President's administration proposal to transition to a mandatory funding stream for the program in future years is also something I fully support. I'd like to mention a couple of other issues. In addition to conservation proposals, I'm pleased to see the President's budget is focused on science and landscape and watershed management. I'm particularly pleased to see the proposals throughout the budget to foster climate change resilience in these areas. And I believe we must invest in science and smart solutions. In this vein, I'm particularly pleased to see the administration's continued commitment to the Yakima Basin project. This $3 million increase in the proposed budget for the Yakima Basin is critical to completing FISC passage and continuing to provide the stewardship that's needed. This project will restore fish runs that have been blocked for more than a century and on one of what is the largest sockeye salmon runs in the lower 48. So Secretary Jewell, as a fellow Washingtonian, I know you understand the importance of salmon issues to the entire economy. So I want to thank the Bureau of Reclamation for being such great partners on a plan that I think is a model for the rest of the nation in watershed management. I will save the rest of the comments for the record on the Yakima Basin project, but turn to the National Park Service Centennial. It is our 100th anniversary since the founding of the National Park Service. And along those lines, I want to say that I support our efforts to get legislation in, and was happy to introduce the initiative by the administration. But having said that, we need to work together, Senators Murkowski and Portman and others, on a National Park Service bipartisan effort to help make sure that the national park's next 100 years is well positioned. So I know this is a big challenge here in supporting new dollars or the challenges of coming up with how we upgrade our park system. But I am sure that if there's anyone here that can meet that task, it is Secretary Jewell, because of her great love of the national park system, her great utilization of it, and her great promotion of it. So I hope that a number of the issues that have been detailed by both Chairman Murkowski and myself as we talk about this proposal actually come to fruition with some legislation that we can get passed, because clearly the next 100 years of our parks deserves the investment that was made at the first 100 years. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you for holding this important hearing.